to know the response to the beginning of the second season from a network standpoint. And, you know, rewatching it on the big screen, it's a really amazing episode. But, you know, it's one thing to watch it in a big theatrical setting. I'm sure that you guys must have had some interest in its pacing and sort of how strange some of the things are. Because of the success of the first season, what was ABC's approach to the relaunching the series with the second season?
They just wanted ratings. That's all they wanted was ratings, and they were disconnected from the process because Mark and David really they were not interested in a relationship with the network. They wanted to make what they wanted to make, and it became an annoyance to them. And I had a tremendous amount of pressure to dig in and rip it apart and fix it and clear it up and thin it out and make it a mystery and figure it out. And it was an impossible task because it was on this track and it wasn't getting off that track. There was no way to get it off that track because if you tried to derail what made Twin Peaks so magical was it was just an illusionary world, and it worked so perfectly for a moment in time. And that's all it was meant to be, was a moment in time. And I think as filmmakers, if they could have just walked away from it at that point, they would have been very satisfied because they made something amazing. And it was so brilliantly unique. But the network's insatiable desire for ratings and to keep this thing going for 5 years was this alien notion. So you have to understand at this point in time, the network was paralyzed, and it did not know what to do with this thing. It didn't work with anything else they had. They didn't know how to promote it. They didn't know how to explain it, and they didn't know what was coming next.
Tell us a little bit about the viewership, how you were sort of tracking who was watching the show, because obviously besides ratings, I'm sure that there were some other key things like the demographic of who's watching it and how that relates back to the sponsors who were paying for advertising space. What was ABC's? What were you guys looking for?
Well, it was designed to reach 25 to 54-year-old men and women, and predominantly network television was 60-40, 60% women, 40% men. They wanted shows that could be cohabitation shows, shows where either side of the aisle was not controlling the remote. They wanted them to watch together. They wanted, certainly wanted affluence, so $70,000 a year, people making $70,000 a year or more they wanted watching. So they were looking for a very specific niche, and that was very important ratings driver because in those days, as it is today, cars and very expensive perishable items were where all the ratings, where the dollars were to make money. Because you have to remember, network television is not in the entertainment business. They never were and they never will be. They're in the advertising business. The spaces between the advertising and this annoying stuff that we watch. But to them, it's just a waste of their time. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, at what point also did you get a sense that the ratings were becoming a problem?
Well, they actually started to become a problem after the sixth episode, and the reason why of season 2, yes, of season 2. The reason why is because specifically exactly what Gregg just alluded to, which is the show was incredibly confusing. And you have to understand, in those days on network television, there was a very specific principle that had to be used. You had to come into a show on the quarter hour and know where you were. If you couldn't come into the show on the quarter hour as an audience member and plug into the story, you would leave. And so the matrix for that was you had about 3.5 minutes to grab an audience. If you couldn't get them in 3.5 minutes, they were gone. Now, I defy you to watch 3.5 minutes of Twin Peaks and tell me where you are on any given night. You have to want to come to Twin Peaks because you love the world. You want to come because these characters are amazing and you don't care where you are. That doesn't work for The Matrix.
Is this on? You guys ever talked about how the ratings curve actually went on the show?
No.
Because I think it's really interesting though, because when you're asking about it, it was just a rocket at the beginning, and then it kept going up until episode 6 or 7 when we revealed Laura Palmer. And then if you watch it, it kind of just dropped like a rock, and week after week, it was going down and down and down to the point where by the time we were on episode 18, 19, 20, we knew we were done. And it's a really interesting study on how you make a television show and what was it that made everybody watch, and why is everybody here, and what's so exciting about it. Did you guys watch 5 episodes today?
Yeah.
So and you're only 5 episodes into the second season, right? So I mean, it'll be interesting when are you going to get all the way through?
Yeah. So basically, the next session will be the 4 episodes that reveal.
Right.
And then we have basically two nights with all of the sort of other
the other
stories.
Oh, that's a very disingenuous word, reveal. It's very, very disingenuous.
But it was it episode 10 that we the
it's
reveal?
episode 9. Well,
No, okay.
there's episode 7 and then episode 9.
Right. Okay.
So
in that, but after that, I mean, this was a show that started out for me the first time I watched it, because I was handed the almost finished pilot. Said, hey, you want to work on this thing? And it was, I was a surfer boy from California. I watched this and I had blown away. And to me, it was a show about the grief that a small town feels when somebody young dies. That was at the heart of it, more than anything. And
You were doing better than they were, by the way, at that point.
yeah, but that ultimately, when you watch it, that's what it is. And you watch everybody just grieving and struggling, and then all these secrets are revealed, and it's mysterious, and there's this whole mystery. Once we blew that out of the water, if you ask what it is towards the end of the show. Every show has something that carries it all the way along from beginning to end. If the last 15 seasons, if it's got that thing. And this had this one sort of path we were on, and then went on a whole different path. And again, before TiVo and everything else, you check in on episode 12 and start watching, at the quarter hour, you're done.
The mechanics of the narrative are very interesting. I don't know if any of the audience has seen The Killing on AMC. If you look at the first season of that show, which was based on a foreign format, but the mechanics of it was beautiful. It was designed to be one thing and gone, but it was a mystery, and it was written beautifully. But Twin Peaks should have been on that track, and it wasn't.
But then again, you had filmmakers who were exploring something and trying something out, and in the end, maybe it didn't work. But it's a little bit different, because it was, to me, Twin Peaks is the first great HBO show. It's just HBO wasn't doing that.
I think it did work. It just didn't work for ABC.
Right.
But
exactly.
in my opinion, it worked brilliantly.
Right.
And I think that final hour of the show is incredible. And first of all, I'm very glad that ABC was willing to air it, because you want to talk about something that makes very little sense, especially if you're popping into it halfway through.
I mean, we knew at that point we were canceled, and we had the union had, we were an independent film company at the time. I mean, we were in warehouses that were old mechanics warehouses. We had no money. We had less money than any other show ever had. It was what we were doing. You know, it was very unconventional what we did. So, God, I just lost my train of thought thinking how hard I had to work. You had to work to make all that money work, but I literally just lost my train of thought.
So talking about that last episode.
Oh yeah, no, we got struck. We got struck, and so we basically, and by the time the strike was over and we got everybody back, we knew we were canceled. So we could do whatever we wanted.
But before that happened, you have to understand, there was a moment in time where they were thinking, you know, this may deserve another year.
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. And I said, okay, what are we going to do? Well, the network, he said, well, I'd like to read a script. I'd like to read it. I just want to refresh myself. We sent him the script.
Who's that?
Bob Iger. Yeah, so the script I gave him was 21 pages long for an hour of television. He said, where's the rest of it? I said, that's it. He said, that's it? I said, yeah, you have to wait for the cut. And he said, okay, well, I want to screen the cut. He said, I want everybody here to screen the cut because we're going to talk about whether or not this is going to get picked up because maybe I'm wrong, but let's have a screening. So Gregg came over and we had a screening. And he and I sat in the back of the screening room and they all sat there and they watched this. And if you remember, there was a 3.5-minute walk in the back. You know, I won't say, but it's a scene that takes 3.5 minutes. It's one shot. It's the camera does not cut. It moves. It just moves like this. 3.5 minutes. And it doesn't stop. It just keeps going and going. And just before the end of Gregg leans over to me and he said, "This is the last episode of Twin Peaks." And it was.
All right, so I'm also curious to know, once the series was kind of in this sort of ratings turmoil and it started to have some time slot shifting, things like that, if there, at that point, once we moved past the murder, if there were notes from ABC that Mark and David did in fact take?
No. No. And in fact, I don't know how much of this we want to get into, but there was turmoil within that camp. So that affected the writing process and everything else. Gregg had his hands full. Make no mistake about it. This was a very complex show, and it was a child that essentially became orphaned. And if it wasn't for Gregg, there wouldn't have been a show.
Well, we do have writers coming in later in the retrospective, so we can kind of approach that down the line. So I want to open this up to you guys, but before we do so, do you guys have any favorite stories from the set that you'd like to share?
I love the day I went over to the set. David was supposed to be shooting, and we had a call time, and he was shooting, and he wasn't there. And I went to Gregg, and I said, "Gregg, where's David?" And he said, "Well," he said he pulled into the parking lot, and he saw 666 on a license plate, and so he took off. And I said, he took off? He says, yeah. He says, well, when will he come back? He said, well, he's going to come back when he sees another license plate that says something 999 on it or something to kill it. He'll come back, and then we can start the day.
But in typical David fashion, so he came back about 2 hours later. It was actually, I don't think he had ever got to the set. Kyle MacLachlan's brother was his driver. And we were trying to find him, and he finally found him at some point. He stopped somewhere and called in. He said, "We're just trying to find a license plate that says 999 or whatever the number was. And we can't come back to the set until we do it." But so he showed up about 2 hours late and then wrapped his day early because that's how David is. I mean, he was like, "Don't worry, Gregg, we're going to be fine." And we were. So he's quirky, but he's brilliant.